Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. First thing I wanted to do is just introduce Suzanne Paul, who is a planner with the Musson Group. She's sitting in. You might see her face pop up on some stuff as we're working through some of all this good things that we're working on Mount Desert. So Suzanne is living over in Bar Harbor, and her husband works at COA. Suzanne's got 2 young kids, and they live and they all both are, one of them goes to Emerson, right? And the other one is at the community school right now. So Suzanne, anything you want to mention, Suzanne?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I'm, excited to be on board and really interested in all this great work. I am sitting in the car at the parking lot at Springer's Gymnastics in Ellsworth. So if the overhead light goes off and I go dark, I'm still here. But thank you for having me.
Great. Yes. Also, Suzanne's got a really good GIS background and recreational planning.
Yes.
From her other previous work. So happy to have her on board.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. A couple things on the agenda today. First is just going to review a couple of ordinance changes, and then maybe spend a little bit of time going over we pulled together some data on housing just to kind of start our conversation about housing issues and sort of stemming from the questions around seasonal vacation rentals, and thought we'd go from there. So let's jump into the good stuff, and then we'll get to the hard stuff. So sharing my screen. I think last time we talked about this, just sort of setting the stage for a warrant article related to access provisions. And just wanted to show everybody a copy of sort of what we're planning on doing. We may tweak the language around a little bit more based on back and forth conversations with the town attorney, but basically looking at making a revision to 6B11, the access provision. And it's more or less going to be a delete the current provision and just add, number 1, which is dealing with lots created on or after June 6th, and then number 2, lots created before June 6th of 2015. So there's like a kind of a 2015 cutoff date that correlates with some work that we had done in the past. And the idea here is for the lots that are created before the 2015 deadline, to allow a little more flexibility in terms of of how they meet, still maintaining access provisions, but a little more flexibility in their ability to get to their lot, because there was a bunch of lots in the town, as we discussed, which are basically already there, already created lots, but are on lots access ways that are a little bit substandard at this point, in accordance with existing rules. So we're just trying to create some flexibility there. I can forward around the text after this meeting so everybody can actually look at it, but without spending a huge amount of time digging into the details, that's where we are right now. I know it's last minute, so any discussion? Does it make sense overall? It's pretty much what we sort of addressed last time, but we need to make a few other tweaks. So I'll just send this around either tonight or tomorrow morning so everybody can look at it.
Is there anything significantly different between the old?
Not yet. I think we're still sort of struggling with, as determined by the fire chief kind of thing, without overburdening Mike Bender, and also kind of trying to balance out, the Kim's ability to make a determination versus what might make sense to get some opinions for the fire chief are. But like the policy choice is really, again, we want to make sure that all the lots have some valid access that's safe and meets a certain set of standards, but some lots don't necessarily have to have all the updated, rights of ways and those kinds of things, because they're already created. So we're just still trying to deal with that. No, but any little tweak is sort of like I think we're getting to those points in the ordinance where we tweak something, we really have to be careful how much it really affects all the other things that we're trying to do. So, Bill.
Yeah, remind me again, what was the significance of June 6th?
Kim might be able to help me remember, but we had already dealt with some stuff back in the 2015 timeframe. And I think we're trying to, and that's when some things in the ordinance changed that would really have triggered some of these, the reason for this ordinance. So.
In June 6, 2015, we did away with minimum width of road, lot, on a road, or minimum width of a lot on a road, I guess. And so we did away with that, and then we created this access language. And the access language was intended to apply to new lots that were created, not pre-existing lawful non-conforming lots of record, or lots that met the minimum width of lot on the road at the time this ordinance was changed. So, for private roads. And recent findings from MMA attorneys and our own attorneys said, hey, this just doesn't apply to new lots, it applies to everybody. So that was kind of an eye-opener, and that wasn't the intent when we created this language. So now we're kind of breaking it down now to show that pre-existing lawful non-conforming lots of records and lots that predated the adoption of this in 2015 are not burdened by the hardship of having to upgrade the private roadway to the street design and construction standards in the subdivision ordinance.
So, yeah, principally back in 2015, the idea that, you don't need to actually have a minimum road frontage requirement, but we still want to maintain access. And that was where I think there was a minimum like 20 feet or something that we had for just driveways. And then there's a different set of road standards. And there's still a provision in the subdivision ordinance because allowing property owners to go to the planning board and get, call it a variance, but it's more of a waiver of standards for actual roads if you're doing something that would be triggered, by the subdivision rule. But there's still the idea that there's things that you don't have to go to planning board for too. So yeah, we've got Andy Hamilton and John Cunningham from Meet and Peabody working on this, as well as Kim and I trying to unwind the whole thing and provide flexibility. So that's where we are. Did that answer your question, Bill? Sort of long-winded from my end, but.
That was good. Thank you, Noel.
Thanks. Okay, so I'll send this around. Couple other things I just wanted to kind of pose for the consideration of whether or not you think it's a good idea that one of which we have to do, and the other one I am just making sure. I wonder if people thought it was a good idea. So the first one, these are shoreline zoning changes that are recently adopted by the state. Trying to share my screen again. So I'll skip to the bottom one first. If you can see this, the state recently made some changes to the shoreline zoning standards, which actually require, when you're getting in the permitting process, photographic records now. So basically, when you're going to do a permit, you have to show before pictures and then you have to show after pictures. Some of us who do like NRPA permits and stuff, you're actually supposed to do before and after pictures there, but they never ever ask for it. And now they're just putting it in sort of that municipal side when you're getting a permit within the shoreline zone. So this is going to get added to the ordinance because it's already in the rules and we have to add it. The second one is the state recently also enacted a provision in shoreline zoning which would allow marina-based restaurants in the shoreline zone to expand. So currently, if they're within the setback, they're not allowed to expand. And there is some language now in the rules, which would allow them to do some expansions when they're associated with marinas. Now, we don't have to enact this one. So before I put pen to paper, I just, and the rules are kind of, I'll actually switch screens and see if I can pull up the rules.
We don't have any restaurants and marinas anyways, do we?
We do, yes, actually. Abel's is a restaurant marina.
Oh, right.
Um,
Yep. I'd forgotten about Abel's.
Yeah, so not to make a change specifically just for Abel's, but I do think it provides a little more flexibility in the future. So if you can see this, these are the rules. This is pretty much what would be adopted. And I can put this in if you think it's an interesting idea, what I'll do is put it in the warrant article format, and then everybody can kind of look at it in the context of our, the town of Mount Desert's ordinance.
Is Abel's actually part of the marina, or are they just, I mean, is it all one entity, or are they two separate entities?
I haven't actually looked at it, Jerry, looked at Abel's enough to know whether or not this is how this relates to Abel's at this point, but I think it is more or less one entity. They just are operated by two separate people. But I'm not positive.
It is one, and they lease the restaurant.
Pardon me again? Who does?
It is owned by one entity, and they lease the restaurant.
Okay, that was my question.
So, essentially it just gives a little flexibility for expansion of the restaurant or some things that are really associated with something like a marina anyway. So any feedback on that? Go for it and we'll see how it goes.
As a warrant article, sure.
Yep. Okay. That was easy.
That was me and my warrant committee hat.
I'll put it in warrant article format and then you guys can look at it and we can make a final decision, but it makes sense. Before I did that, I just want to, if everybody thought that's a horrible idea, then I won't do it, but sounds like we're good. Okay.
Just to let you know, I have been asked by the leasee of Abel's to expand, but because it's a non-conforming use, they can't expand right now. So this is kind of something that will benefit them, which I don't know if they know this is coming down the pipeline, but it will make them happy.
So we'll draft it up and see what it looks like. Okay, just a couple other things on the list that I've been working on. Individual campsite, a revision to the individual campsite section in the ordinance, because we really haven't, that's 6B9, just to deal with RVs, something it isn't dealt with there. Looking at any issues that might come up between minimum lot area and minimum lot size in the village commercial district. So I think we had this conversation last time about, certain areas might inadvertently allow for, huge amount of density in areas that we might not want a huge amount of density. And then I haven't spent a lot of time on this, but I do think parking seems like that was a topic that was worth discussing from recent planning board meetings. And we haven't spent a lot of time on that, but I did add that is on the list as well.
You're talking about parking
standards, and I know that, and Derlin, maybe you can weigh in, but I know that there's been other committees that we're starting to think about parking.
Mm-hmm. But you're mostly talking about Northeast, right?
Yeah.
Give you a little update. Jim Willis is working on a proposal for leasing slots within town. So you might want to check base with him on what he's doing there. He's came with a proposal before the board last night that he's going to refine and bring back to them. So that
Great.
would be helpful for you.
Yep. And again, before we, so we're trying to understand if there are any issues, and then if there are any regulatory approaches that we need to discuss here. So I just keeping it on the list. Stephanie, did you have a question?
No, Derlin kind of answered it. Yeah, the Board of Selectmen meeting last night. It's starting, yeah, permit parking and whatnot.
Right. Okay.
What-
So go ahead.
What's that about? I'm sorry, I didn't go to the Board of Selectmen meeting last night. What is the permit parking for and what's it about? Is that because of the new?
That's,
Um,
Kim, a couple of things. I think it's primarily driven by the possibility of new apartment buildings coming up on Main Street in the near future that will have need for parking that may or may not be able to provide enough on site. So you might want to get to Jim and he can fill you in on more of the details, but
I'll talk to Jim. Yep. Thank you, Darlene.
Thank you.
All right. The next thing on the list was just wanted to go over some housing data because I know that the Board of Selectmen talked a little bit more about the seasonal rental or the vacation rental issue last time, and we talked a little bit about this or last night, and then we talked a little bit about this at the last meeting with the idea of kind of first and foremost, let's kind of set the stage for the discussion and just providing a bit of a high level background. So this is kind of like painting the picture of what's happening with housing stock, housing prices, income demographics, and what data we can pull from vacation rentals. And then I think we can have a conversation, or at least start a conversation about, what are the vacation rental ideas or issues that we're trying to understand? What are the housing issues that we're really looking at? Are there ways that we might start from the LUZO side of things, to address some of those things, and then providing some feedback eventually to the Board of Selectmen on how we're going to do that. So share my screen again. So what we pulled together again is some data, high-level data on housing stock, housing prices, income demographics, and some information on vacation rentals. And Suzanne was super helpful on this. So if I glaze over anything, Suzanne can jump in and tell me I missed something. So let's see. I'll start the slideshow. That makes it easier. All right. So hopefully everybody can see that. The slide that says housing stock, everybody can see that. So just to give a little bit of background, according to the census and there's census data and American Community Survey data, there are about 2,205 housing units in the town of Mount Desert right now. And about 46% of those are occupied, and about 54% of those would be categorized as vacant. And that can mean a few different things. It could mean generally that people were away from their house for longer than like a week or a vacation than when they were surveyed. So it's kind of interesting statistic and number just to look at this and recognize that there's actually more than half of the housing units in Mount Desert are considered vacant, which may or may not really be a surprise based on what we all know about the population in the town. But
Do you have a breakdown of town by town of that by any chance?
we can get one just as a comparison. Yeah, we haven't done that yet. We kind of focused on Mount Desert.
Yeah, probably be a good idea,
Yep.
in my opinion.
Yes. Yep. No, it's always good. And then the percentage of or the largest percentage of housing types is single family detached housing, which obviously when I think about it, really isn't a surprise. There's a lot less, apartments or multi-unit apartments. So quite a bit of there's, single family homes is the predominant housing. So interesting sort of breakdown. The information that we were able to get through a data site called Redfin, which calculates, real estate prices. And then Katrina was actually quite helpful in giving some information as a snapshot picture of what's on the market. But So basically between 2017 and 2021, the median sale price of homes was around 487,000. So that's sort of the median between all those years leading up to 2021. And the sale price of homes actually went up between that period by 133%, which is really interesting. And then based on what we know from just a picture in a day of the real estate market. So November 2nd was when Katrina and I talked about this. There were 16 active house listings in Mount Desert at that point, and the median sale price was $1,012,500.
Hey, Noel,
Yeah,
the sale prices of the homes that went up during that time period of 2017 to 2021, it looks like a huge jump, but it could have only been very few number of houses. So that's a funny statistic to use because we don't know how many homes, because if we had gone through a series of small homes like in Sylvan City that were for sale, and then during that next time period, they were houses on the shore that were for sale, that's a funny, it would be interesting to know the number of homes that sold in that time period, 17 to 21,
okay.
and where they were located, because it's a funny number.
Well, it's a median number and it is skewed by the waterfront houses, so.
Right.
Yeah.
It would be, it would be nice to know how many homes were sold from prior to that, just, It went up 133%, but that average number was 487. What was it for the 5 years prior?
It is a median and not an average, so it's trying to account for the skewing of like a really high number, but those obviously still have a huge impact. I didn't memorize how many listings that was, but I want to say it was like over 50, but we can get that for you.
So you can break down, sorry.
Yeah, I'm in the car. I can't look it up right now, but we could figure out exactly how many houses that was and then where they're located for sure. And it is just Redfin. So Redfin is one of these real estate listing sites where you can put in a filter to say, show me everything that sold, and then you can download that data. So it is just one source. It's not like the comprehensive source, but I think it's an interesting kind of quick glance.
Can it be broken down to like over a million, under a million?
Yeah, absolutely. We can take that list and, group them in certain ways and look at like, different breakdowns and look at where they're located.
I think location is probably less important than the price. If it was 10 houses at $3 million and then 5 houses at
Right.
495,000, it's going to skew it.
Well, so what I think is, this is just sort of like thinking about looking at trends a little bit and trying to get a picture of like the fact that housing prices are increasing, which, anecdotally, we think we know a lot of things, but it's nice to see that data is kind of confirming what we think we already know. But I thought, the snapshot in time picture was also very interesting in a couple of different ways. And one is there's only 16 active listings, or there were at the time. There may be more now, but, Katrina could probably weigh in on whether or not that's like a pretty consistent number or depends on the time of the year. But let's not overthink it at this point. But the fact that which we haven't added here, but the least expensive home on that time frame was about $360,000. So the number here does get skewed a little bit because I think the most expensive home was probably almost $8 million. But the fact of the matter is there's only 16 homes available and only one of them was in the price range that, as we get to the data a little bit later, that somebody can actually afford to buy. So that's kind of telling to me. And then looking at the active listings for land, thinking about the median sale price of the land that was available being around $150,000. you know, Bill could probably attest to this even more than I can, but, you know, knowing the average price per square foot to build anything, you know, if you're starting off at $150,000 and then you're on the low end, say $300 a square foot these days, maybe probably more than that, at least from my perspective or my reflection, you know, just to build like the average house. That's a lot. Still getting to
That's
that unaffordable.
500, no.
$500 a square foot. Bill, come on, you're making me. That's, you know, but realistically, you know, that's an issue. So something that we're, you know, again, just something to kind of, as a snapshot, a really interesting point. With the other data that we can start to pull out of even that like snapshot is, you know, there were, you know, 6 of the 16 listings, you know, I don't know what the specifics of that, or even within the range of possibility for somebody earning the median income for the area.
I'm surprised the land listing isn't higher.
You're surprised what?
The land listing median isn't higher.
Yeah, it is surprising. Yep.
It is just from that one day in November. So it might be interesting to do the same, like show all the land that's sold in the last 5 years too. You know, we could do it the same way.
Yeah, there's like, at that day, there were, you know, 4 lots on the market, 5 lots on the market. Let's see, actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lots on the market that were under 150,000. And then
it would again be good to break it into districts of where the lots were.
yep,
Um,
that's easier with the stuff that Katrina provided.
yeah, it's just because there are lots that are well under that, and there are lots that are well over it.
Yep. Yeah, so there's also some other data that's not included here that we're gonna pull together, but the state of Maine housing actually does like an affordability index. And just looking at that today for 2020, they said the median home price was $752,000. And I thought that was really interesting. So we'll get to that in just a second. So just to kind of give a snapshot about demographics, you know, there's about 800 total households, average size of about 2.19 people, you know, as we're getting into like more comprehensive planning analysis. But as we get into that more, you can also kind of start to look at trends about average household size and whether or not it's going up or down. And historically, it's going down. So that means there's a little more demand for houses and less people living in them. And then the median income is about $76,000, almost $77,000, according to the data that we were able to pull. And there's about 24% of the households have a family income that is at or below 80% of the HUD median area, a median family income. And then about 22% are what we say cost burdened, or severely cost burdened, meaning that they pay more than 30% of their housing, of their income on monthly housing costs. So, you know, the affordability starts at about that 30%. You don't want to pay more than that. And what Maine Housing says is that when they rate different towns based on an index, so an index of 1 is about right, an index over 1 is much more affordable, an index of less than 1 is much less affordable, and the housing index for Mount Desert is 0.43. So you need about an income of about $182,000 to be able to afford the median home in the town of Mount Desert right now. And if you just look at medians, you'd need to make, what would you need? You'd need to make, actually I lied, you need to make $182,000 to be able to afford that's what you'd need to be able to afford different things. You need to make a $322,000 to be able to afford the median home price currently in Mount Desert. So it just sort of starting to paint a picture for everybody about like, what some things I think we already recognize and have talked about in the past, but the idea that housing is starting to become much less affordable and also much less available. So we wanted to just give a little bit of data on vacation rentals, just so we can start to paint a picture. And I will say this data comes from AirDNA. It was available online. It captures sort of the Airbnb and VRBO listings, but not any privately managed sort of vacation rentals. And this is really just we tried to pick a couple snapshots. I will say it gets a little complicated when you start to try to pull together data on housing or vacation rentals. And how it's a little nuanced in sort of how you think about it. But as a snapshot, what we were able to find as of today, there were 234 active rental listings in the town of Mount Desert. During the peak season, which would be about July, August, September, there were 274 active listings. And about half, more than half, almost all of them were entire home rentals, so 89%. And about 11% of those were private room rentals. And the majority of the rentals were about 2 to 3 bedrooms or more. So we have just sort of a pie chart, just to show just to kind of show what the rental types were, and thinking about, each quarter when the most activity would be. And then I think it's really interesting to see it on a map. So how are vacation rentals kind of spread out around the town? This is a snapshot of a portion of Mount Desert. You'll notice that some of it's missing, which is on the next slide. Some concentrations over in the Otter Creek area, somewhere in the Somesville area. And then quite a bit is spread out, around Long Pond and some other areas around Pretty Marsh. And then looking at Northeast Harbor and Seal Harbor as other active listing areas, kind of a concentration there. And what would really be helpful, I think, is to kind of start to think about how we can put these in a bit more of a comprehensive map to really try to understand where the pockets of concentrations are for vacation rentals in the community. And we have to do a little more digging to try to figure out how to do that. But these are a starting point for understanding.
Do you have any idea how many private rentals there are on top of the Airbnb ones? And is there some way to find out? Does Knowles Rentals not count as Airbnbs?
I don't think they do through Airbnb. So that would be a question, like, to do a little more research to say, to call up some of the local real estate, like the Knowles Company or some of the other ones, just to ask if they can share or are willing to share the data.
I bet you'd almost double the number of rentals if you did that.
No, so I do rentals, and I don't put any of my rentals that are private homes on Airbnb or VRBO, but many rental agencies, Knowles, the people in Bar Harbor, they do as well, put them on Airbnb. So I don't think it would double it, Jerry, but the number is greater.
Half it?
Go ahead.
50% it?
No.
No, less than that? Huh.
Because the other thing too is, I rent your house, the Knowles Company rents your house, and then the Knowles Company puts it on Airbnb. So you don't want to count it 3 times.
Okay.
We often have the same list of rentals that we're working with. So, I have a few exclusive, they have a few exclusive, but many of, I don't deal with Airbnb or VRBO because I don't want to, because I choose not to. The Knowles Company chooses to with some of their homeowners. So, if that's helpful.
And then, I hate to do this all the time, but what about summer rentals where people rent their house out for the whole summer?
For the whole summer?
Yeah, there's a lot of April to November live-ins here, and then they throw them out and rent them out for the summer.
Yes, but remember too, there's a lot of summer families that I get the phone call that says, I need a place for July, and then all of a sudden their best friend's boyfriend's fraternity brother has offered them their house for free for the summer. Well, it's not really for free.
Yes.
You know they're paying them under the table. You know the tenant's not paying the 9% sales and use tax, and they're not reporting the income. So I don't know how you take that into consideration with this.
Well, let's just sort of take it back to the basics. I mean, because there's so many nuances when it comes to summer rentals that I think what I've really been struggling with, and I think Suzanne and I we've talked about this probably for at least hours, it seems like, and even today, we're sort of struggling with how to really think about the question. And I think I've mentioned this before, but number one, I wanted to kind of paint a picture of what the housing market is right now. And I think I'd love some reflections on what everybody thinks to the data rather than me just telling you what I think. And then number two, because we've been asked by the board of selectmen to kind of look at this particular issue, I'd love to start to think about, okay, what issues related to this might we be looking to try to solve through a regulatory approach. And it's to me a very complicated question. So if I'm sort of struggling right away, it's only because I haven't quite figured out how to facilitate this particular conversation yet, because of it's such a challenge. But I guess my first question is, let's reflect on what do you think the data says that we just went over? Like, what are your reflections on the data?
Shoreline, can I ask you a question? You had mentioned, you had sent an email to Noel and I about it being brought up last night at the BOS. Can you just explain what was brought up and what was discussed?
Darlene, you're on mute. You got to unmute, Darlene.
Okay.
Almost there.
Still muted, Darlene.
No,
Yeah,
There you go.
they asked me a question about what progress had been made on the drafting of a potential regulatory ordinance to be voted on for town meeting this May on the rental situation. So I mentioned that we were addressing it and I would get back to them. We were meeting tonight and I'd report back to them at a later date. So that's basically, they want to know what progress had been made towards, they want something, in other words, they want something to vote on in May.
What's the goal?
So
What's the goal?
I think
What's
the
the
goal
goal?
is to identify how many short-term rentals there are in the town of Mount Desert.
What is short term?
Well, I think what they're looking at, week, 2 week, that type of thing.
So this is why we're having this conversation, and I think we can facilitate a little bit more, Darlene. Here's how we can report back, and sort of in the absence of us not giving them any feedback, that's what they're asking for. And I think as we sort of work through this conversation that we're having, we're starting to set the stage for kind of a more comprehensive understanding of what the issues are that we're trying to deal with, and then what maybe some of the regulatory solutions to that are. If you want to cut right to the chase of it all, like there's a set of baseline data that the only way you're going to figure out is to really just ask people to register. And to Katrina's point, what we would want to do in that situation is devise a regulatory or a licensing process. It doesn't, there's all kinds of options there. And I hate to skip right to the end, but since that's where we are. But we also, I think, with the objective of just saying, look, for the first several years, we just don't know the extent of the use. And I think we can identify through this conversation what particular effects that use might have. But the first step is really understanding how widespread it is, where the concentrations are of weekly rentals, how those concentrations affect either affordability or neighborhood character or whatever it is we're trying to address. But there's sort of an easy regulatory step into the pool. You're kind of dipping your toes into it just by asking people through a licensing process to register. That way we know what we're dealing with, and we're not just guessing using air DNA data, which can be a little bit skewed. And then to Katrina's point, we can actually define what we're asking for. What's short-term rental? We can define that as part of this process.
So once we come up with an ordinance, is that with permitting, is that what's that do? I mean, what's the goal here? Is to regulate them, or what are we doing with them? You
Well,
know?
I would flip the question back on you guys. So let's brainstorm the question, what is it that people are concerned with when it comes to, and be open-minded about it, not necessarily, this doesn't necessarily need to be how you firmly believe, but like the question is what potential impacts could seasonal rentals have on your community?
No, I think one of the things that they were definitely sort of a thread that had gone through a number of their conversations, and I'm hesitant to speak for them, but I'm just going on what I heard. So don't take what I'm saying is basically the truth about what they are not interested in regulating somebody that wants to rent their house out for the summer, for example. That sort of custom that's going on. I think what they are concerned about, and again, this is just from my listening to their conversations, they're worried about commercial entities coming in, buying up houses, and then turning them into short-term rentals. So that's the problem they think is out there. They're not saying that it is out there, but they have a suspicion that it may be. So.
So that's one thing, Darlene. So what are the, just again, all we're doing right now is brainstorming. What are the implications of that?
Well, I think the implications of that, it's sort of the other side of the coin of selling a house to a summer resident, and it becomes vacant, most of the year. So it's sort of the other side of the coin, with perhaps less value, because somebody that comes in and maybe rents a summer home for 2 or 3 months, or a month of July or August, is probably more apt to positively impact the local community, perhaps, than somebody that comes in and rents for a week and is gone. So I think they're looking at that as the other side of the flipping of houses from year-round to seasonal. They think perhaps it does more harm when it goes into short-term rentals as opposed to summer residences. But again, this is just my interpretation of what I'm hearing from them.
So of the 100 leases, approximately probably more than that I write in the course of a year, none of the leases I have done for summer rentals have gone to a company. Many homes are owned by LLCs because of the way the tax rules work. But I'm not writing leases with the homeowner being Zillow or, a big investor. So I don't know that.
Foreigners.
Well, sometimes I write for people from Sonesville, but not often. But
I know. We have our own guys.
So, but is this a worry? Is this a concern?
I would lean towards no and agree with you.
I think that we as a committee have had so many things put upon us at the 9th hour, and poor Otter Creek is out there, and we've not done anything with them. Sonesville came to us last year. We haven't done anything. 3 years ago. We haven't done anything with them. And all of a sudden, this takes a priority. I don't think that we're serving our citizens well if we take this as a priority and ignore Otter Creek and Sonesville.
I also think that if you start considering entities owning the buildings, LLCs are entities. They're not LLCs that are based in Maine. They're based in Philadelphia or Delaware or Washington. And if you start considering outside entities owning these properties, you would have to count them. And that they're really just families, but.
So I'm just trying to think about how we talk about this. Can we all agree, though, that affordability based on the data is an actual issue in Mount Desert?
Yes.
Okay, so that's one thing.
No.
Besides what we want to do in Otter Creek and Seal Harbor, Somesville.
Everybody calls us Seal Harbor.
Yeah, it's all the same. So you're on the water somewhere.
I can see it from my bedroom window now.
Yeah, but I think what would be interesting again is to be able to say, and maybe we don't need to spend a huge amount of time on it, but to identify, okay, here are the kinds of things that may be implicated with seasonal rentals. And if the city, I mean, the town really wants to dive into it, the first step in that and really understanding how to deal with it or manage it would be something like this, whatever that ends up being. And I would recommend it being more like, look, before we really, there's a lot of anecdotal problems. And in order to really understand if there is a problem, you need to understand what the data is, which is why I went to the very beginning of this presentation, which is to say, first and foremost, what's the problem? Let's look at the data so we have one common picture of what the data says. And the only way to really, go ahead, Suzanne.
Oh, no, I don't want to interrupt you. Sorry. I just want to add, like, I think there's kind of two parts to it. It's like how much and then what kind. Like we keep talking about these sort of different types, right? Like these different situations, or really creating like typologies and then figuring out how many and like what kind, I think is helpful. Because not all, theoretically, like not all rules or regulations, one regulation is not going to work for every single different type. So I think we need to be looking at it that way too.
Right. How many are there? And then is this, a single room? Is this a whole house? Has it always been a whole house? Is it, there's all kinds of nuances to the seasonal rental game.
Mm-hmm.
That are really interesting. And I don't want to, what I've been concerned with, and I think I've expressed this before, is like, let's, not create a sense of panic when there really doesn't need to be a sense of panic, because it's going to be an emotional issue. So I think defining what it is that we're trying to do is the best way to kind of work through it, and also still respond to what the Board of Selectmen are asking.
I think that's what Katrina and I both said, is it's not a problem now. Let's figure out what's going on and then deal with it.
Right. But the only way to do that is to get the data. And
Yes.
the way to get the data is to ask people to get it.
Well, I'll watch the guy across the street.
Mhm.
Okay. Stephanie, were you going to say something?
What did you say again that the price was for a median, or how much did a or a person, whatever, have to make to afford a median home in Mount Desert? Was it 232?
338.
322, according to the
322.
main housing.
Yeah.
But again, to get to Jerry's point, and the hardest part about what I find about Mount Desert is you really have to understand like the skew. When you
Yes.
have a $7 million, $8 million property that's being sold, and it really skews things to the higher end. But the data is what the data is. We're not making it up. To me, the question in Mount Desert, and on MDI in particular, partially it's a question of supply. There's just not a lot of houses on the market for one reason or another. And then to get to what Bill was mentioning, we have $500 a square foot and you have a lot that's $150,000. Like, how do you even start to build the supply up? Because you can't build it for a rate that's going to be affordable. So there's some real fundamental challenges, and we're not going to address those all in a regulatory setting. Like we're starting to get into like kind of comp plan territory right now. But in a sort of LUZO context, I think what we're trying to do is answer the question of, or at least figure out, we're asking a question and using a regulatory, like a license potentially, to help us get the data to answer the question as an option.
So many more houses in Bar Harbor. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't worry about it, but I don't.
And again, if it were, this is not the way I intended to. I want to have a kind of a joint conversation about this, but the way I think about these things are, this is a sort of a spread out issue over here.
Yeah.
Very spread out, not very concentrated. What are the real issues over here? There's not a lot of, I would say there's a lot of character, but not necessarily neighborhood character. So if one of the issues that you're trying to deal with is neighborhood character, you want to start to look at Otter Creek or Northeast Harbor or Seal Harbor or even Soamesville.
Or even Soamesville.
Yeah. Right, when we're starting to think about those neighborhoods. So the zone, the regulatory approach for these kinds of things can start to get really focused in on if we're trying to preserve neighborhood character. That's one potential impact of seasonal rentals. And then the market, and this is one thing I really struggle with, so I hate to bring it up because I don't know the answer. But, you know, if you're talking about affordability, you know, what vacation rentals do is potentially take away the option of maybe it was a year-round home that was rented at one point and then turned into so it was rented at an affordable rate, and then now it's turned into a vacation rental because the property owner can monetize higher than they can rentals, and I can speak to that from personal experience. But so that's where it starts to contribute to affordability. But I don't understand the market enough to say, well, people are coming in all over MDI to buy homes that they're going to live in, you know, either for a month or for 2 weeks, or they're planning on retiring here. There's so many nuances to kind of consider when it comes to this issue. So what I'm really trying to figure out is how do we, for now, understand the complexity of it and then focus it in on the areas that really need to be treated now, as opposed to like a blanket.
It looks like Hall Quarry is something that we should look into specifically because that's most of the houses in Hall Quarry.
Yeah. And
I was noticing that too. I was like, man, I live in Hall Quarry.
Yeah.
Well, how much you getting for your rentals?
I'm not renting it, but I guess I should consider. But yeah, no, and actually
Looks like everybody else
in
is.
the summer. Yeah,
No,
it is in the
Is
summer.
that a big chunk of the campground? Is that a big chunk of the purple?
I don't know. We'll have to look into that. I don't know if this is all, I mean, it looks like it's in the area where the campground is, but I don't know if that specifically a campground would be rented on Airbnb. I think we should put that on our list, Suzanne, just to try to understand that.
Yeah, there's not that, she's got a
Definitely.
few houses on the shore, but not that many.
There's 3.
So the other thing too is if you go to the Northeast Harbor screen, I
Yep.
know the Harborside Inn is on Airbnb. So that kind of skews it a little bit. That's the Harborside Inn with all those rooms. It would be out on Harborside. So these aren't all just individual homes. So please understand that.
Right.
Mhm.
And I think that goes back to what I was saying about really we need to dig into like the number, but then also like all these different scenarios, all these different types, situational types that we need to kind of pull apart and really look at and understand.
So Darlene, just as a matter of following up with the board, do you think it would be helpful to kind of try to summarize, you know, where we are in the conversation and sort of the complexity of the issue? And here's a few steps that we're trying to take to address their concern, but also recognizing that it's a lot more complicated than, you know, just.
I think that would be a good first step. I think we should do that as soon as possible.
Okay, so we can work on like a memo.
Yeah, and I think we should include the fact that we don't really think it's a major problem of outsiders coming in and buying up Airbnb properties
Or
at this point.
companies.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's what I meant. Swedes and whatnot.
Yeah, but fundamentally recognize that the affordability is an issue. And that I think hopefully everybody can agree that there are some fundamental things that vacation rentals can do to detrimental to your community that we should be starting to plan for. That makes sense?
Mhm. Yeah, planning for is good.
Yep. It is very complicated. I don't know. I mean, really struggling with it. I know I've just observed the town next door, and I'd love to try to figure out a way to have a conversation about it rather than bringing sledgehammer.
Mhm.
But also have it recognizing like this town is a lot different than over here, what's happening over here, a little more spread out, I think.
And a completely different business structure of people bringing in year-round workers in a completely different number.
Right. Well, I mean, realistically, the issue is an island-wide issue. It's not.
Oh, yeah,
a harbor
but-
or Mount Desert issue. Like there's no, you know, this line means nothing to people who need to live here and work here.
Well, I don't think the Astico is going to be buying up houses for their employees soon.
Okay. Anything else we need to go over?
I'm so sorry. I have to take off. My daughter's gymnastics class is over, but thank you so much for letting me join in, and I'm really looking forward to working on this.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Mhm.
I'm going to stop sharing. All right. Well, that's what I had for tonight. Anything else you guys want to talk about?
Thank you.
And by the way, I do have Otter Creek and Soamesville still on my list.
We'll wait. We're patient people.
Hopefully they are too.
But them, I don't know.
Okay.
Thank you, Noel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Noel.
Thanks, Noel.
Yep.